The lights in the diamond store seemed almost too bright now, each reflection bouncing off the glass cases like a cruel reminder of everything that had just happened. Malik stood still, the weight of the small velvet box in his palm feeling heavier than any stone he had ever carried. His breath came slow, almost hesitant, as he stared down at the glittering ring inside a promise he had intended for someone who had shattered him only hours earlier. The woman beside him, Alina, glanced at him, her brows knitting with curiosity and concern. She had been a friend for years, always at the periphery of his life, never stepping into the center. But now, somehow, she was here. The betrayal still stung, the image of Amara in the arms of another man replaying in his mind in an endless, merciless loop. It had been like watching a fire consume something precious and being too far away to save it. Alina placed a hand gently on his arm. "Malik, you don't have to do this today," she said softly, her voice like a fragile thread trying to hold together a frayed piece of fabric. But Malik shook his head. His jaw tightened as he closed the ring box and turned toward the jeweler. "I do," he said simply, and those two words felt like both an ending and a beginning. The jeweler, an older man with careful eyes, brought forward another tray of rings as if sensing that something had shifted. Malik, however, didn't look at them. His mind was already making decisions that his heart was still catching up to. In his mind, the scene with Amara replayed her laughter, not with him, but with someone else. The way she didn't even try to explain when he confronted her, the way she looked at him like she'd already moved on. He had given her years, time, trust, dreams, and she had thrown them away without hesitation. Alina wasn't supposed to be part of this story. She wasn't supposed to be the one standing next to him in a diamond store. Her hand just close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his skin, but far enough to respect the unspoken storm. Raging inside him, he thought about the nights he and Alina had talked, the times she had listened without judgment, the way she never demanded more than he could give. There was no betrayal in her eyes, only patience and an understanding that came from a place beyond friendship. He didn't know if what he was doing now was out of love, or out of the need to escape the ruins of the past, but he knew he couldn't go back, not to Amara, not to the man he was before. The jeweler placed the ring back into its box and slid it toward Malik. "Shall I wrap it for you?" he asked. Malik looked at Alina, really looked at her, and saw the uncertainty in her eyes. "No," Malik said, his voice steady. "I'll take it just like this." He turned to Alina, holding out the box. She blinked, clearly caught off guard. "Malik, what are you doing?" she whispered. And for the first time that day, he smiled, not out of joy, but out of the strange freedom that comes when there's nothing left to lose. "I'm asking you to take a chance on me," he said. Her breath caught, her hand trembling slightly as she reached out. Around them, the hum of the store faded, the world narrowing to just the two of them and the quiet, glittering promise between their hands. Malik knew it was sudden, maybe even reckless. But betrayal had burned away the hesitation in him, and all that was left was the raw, unfiltered truth. He didn't want to waste another second on someone who didn't want him, and maybe, just maybe, Alina had been the answer all along. The door chimed softly as Damon stepped deeper into the diamond store, the warm glow of the display lights spilling over rows of glittering engagement rings. His heart was still hammering, not from excitement, but from the storm of betrayal and disbelief that had carried him here. Just hours earlier, he had stood in the shadows across the street from her apartment. The woman he thought he would spend forever with. He had been ready to propose, ready to give her a diamond that would have been a lifetime promise. Instead, he had seen her with another man, their laughter cutting through the air like a cruel melody. Her hand rested on the stranger's arm, as if Damon had never existed. His stomach had turned cold. His chest felt hollow. And yet, here he was now, walking into a place he never expected to be for someone else. The jeweler, an older gentleman with silver hair and a crisp suit, looked up from behind the counter and greeted him with a polite smile. "Looking for something special today?" he asked. Damon nodded slowly, the words catching in his throat. "Yes," he said finally, his voice low. "Something unforgettable." As the jeweler began laying out a tray of rings, Damon's mind kept flashing back to the betrayal, the years of loyalty, the nights of dreaming about a shared future, the plans they made together, all erased in one moment. He had thought about confronting her, demanding an explanation, but the sight of her leaning into another man's embrace had been enough to silence every word. Instead, he had turned away and started walking, the city lights blurring around him, until he found himself in front of this store, and then he thought of her, not the one who betrayed him, but someone else, someone who had been there all along. Her name was Alina. She wasn't the woman he had planned to propose to, but she had been the one who had picked him up from rock bottom years ago, the one who had seen him through sleepless nights and celebrated his smallest victories as if they were her own. She had never asked for anything in return. Damon had kept her at arm's length, too afraid to let himself fall for someone again after the first heartbreak. But now, standing here under the white glow of diamond lights, he wondered if maybe the reason he had walked into this store wasn't just to escape the pain, it was to finally recognize who truly deserved his heart. Asterisk, the jeweler slid a simple, elegant ring toward him, the kind of piece that didn't scream for attention but commanded it through its quiet beauty. Damon picked it up, the cool metal resting against his fingertips. He pictured Alina's face when she saw it, the way her eyes might widen, the soft smile she might try to hide, and for the first time in hours he felt something different. Hope asterisk, he nodded to the jeweler. This one, the man carefully placed the ring in a velvet box, closing it with a soft click that seemed to seal Damon's decision. Payment was quick, the receipt folded neatly and tucked away, but Damon barely noticed. He was already thinking of where to find her, how to tell her, how to make sure she knew this wasn't just a rebound born of pain, it was the truth. He had been too blind to see before. Asterisk, the store door opened behind him as he stepped out into the evening air. The city was alive with motion, car horns and distant music weaving into the hum of life. But Damon walked with a single focus. The box felt heavier in his pocket than its size suggested, as though it carried the weight of every choice that had led him here. The lights of the diamond store reflected off every polished surface, turning the air into a prism of scattered rainbows. But his mind was far from beauty. Malik's chest felt tight, his breath shallow, as if the glass cases around him were closing in like walls. His hands, strong and calloused from years of work, were trembling, not from fear of rejection, but from the lingering weight of betrayal. Every time he blinked, he saw her face, not the woman standing before him now, but the one who had been his world for 5 years, the one who laughed at his dreams and promised forever. He could still hear the low, sharp whisper she gave him that morning, when she thought he didn't hear, the words that sliced through him like shards of broken glass. She had been talking to another man, telling him she was ready to leave. He had walked away quietly then, not because he was weak, but because some betrayals burned too deep to scream over. Now here he was, standing in front of a velvet-lined display, the sparkle of a diamond burning in his palm, and across from him stood Aisha, her eyes wide with confusion and something else, hope, maybe, or disbelief. She hadn't expected him to call her, much less ask her to meet him here. The world outside was still buzzing with life, car horns and laughter, but inside the store, there was only the low hum of the air conditioning and the faint clink of jewelry being rearranged by a clerk who was pretending not to watch them. Malik, Aisha said softly, her voice almost swallowed by the room. Why here? Why now? He swallowed hard. Because I'm tired of running from what's real, he said, his voice low but steady. And I know you've been right here all along. Her breath caught. They had known each other since high school, had crossed paths at odd times. A wedding here, a chance meeting in a grocery store there. Always just missing the moment, always stepping back before anything could spark. But now, Malik was standing close enough for her to see the faint scar under his left eye. The one she remembered from a fight he got into protecting his younger brother years ago. She could feel the heaviness in him, but also the determination. Took a deep breath, the kind you take before jumping into deep water. I'm not going to pretend my heart isn't broken, he said, his voice thick, but I also know it's still beating. And it's beating for you. The clerk had stopped rearranging the display. Even strangers could feel the gravity of this moment. Malik's hand opened slowly, revealing the diamond ring inside the small box. The gem caught the light like it had been waiting for this exact second to shine. You deserve to be chosen, without hesitation, Malik said, his eyes locked on hers. You deserve a man who shows up without making you guess, who knows what he wants and isn't afraid to say it. I should have been that man a long time ago. Aisha's lips trembled, her fingers curling at her sides. For a long moment, she didn't speak. She looked at the ring, then at him, then at the floor, as if trying to find her balance in the storm that had just swept through her life. Finally, her eyes lifted to meet his again, and there was something different in them, not the hesitation of the past, but a spark of belief. The store grew quiet after the laughter faded, the glittering lights above casting a golden glow over the polished glass counters. Outside, the city's evening rush softened into a murmur, the sun beginning to dip into streaks of amber and violet. Malik's hands rested on the counter, the cool glass beneath his fingers grounding him, though his heart still felt like it might burst. In front of him, the jeweler delicately placed the chosen ring into its velvet box. The diamond caught the light, scattering it into 1,000 shards that danced on the walls. He stared at it, almost hypnotized, thinking how this little circle of metal and stone now held the weight of his future. But his thoughts kept flickering back to the betrayal, back to the woman who had once promised forever but left him stranded in the ruins of trust. It was strange how the human heart could be crushed and still find a way to beat again. Beside him, Alina, the woman who had brought light back into his life, was looking at him, not with pity, but with the steady warmth of someone who saw his scars and loved him anyway. She didn't know all of the details, not yet, but she knew enough to understand that this moment was more than just a proposal. It was a declaration that Malik was choosing love again. Despite the pain. Asterisk, the jeweler's voice broke through his thoughts. Shall I wrap it for you? Malik nodded, his throat tightening. As the man worked, Malik glanced at Alina. She had been browsing the store earlier, pretending not to notice the way he moved with nervous energy. But now her eyes were locked on him. Something in her gaze made him feel seen in a way he hadn't felt in years. His mind drifted, unbidden, to the night he discovered the betrayal, cold rain pelting his skin, his phone buzzing in his hand with the message that shattered him. That was a different Malik. That man had thought love was safe, permanent, untouchable. This Malik understood love was fragile, and that made it all the more precious. Asterisk, when the jeweler handed over the small, elegant bag, Malik took it carefully, as though afraid the weight of it might slip from his hands. He paid without hesitation, the metallic click of the register sealing the transaction. As they stepped out of the store, the crisp evening air wrapped around them. The streets were glowing under the lamplight, the world moving in slow motion as Malik reached for Alina's hand. He felt the warmth of her palm against his and knew that this right here was the beginning of something unshakable. Asterisk, he led her toward the park, where the faint sound of water trickling from the old stone fountain filled the air. It was a place he had come to after the heartbreak, a place where he sat on cold benches and tried to piece himself back together. Tonight, it would mean something entirely different. He could feel the words building in his chest, not rehearsed, not polished, but raw and real. As they reached the fountain, the light from the nearby lamppost casting silver over the ripweight for the lights of the diamond store reflected off every polished surface, turning the air into a prism of scattered rainbows. But his mind was far from beauty. Malik's chest felt tight, his breath shallow, as if the glass cases around him were closing in like walls. His hands, strong and calloused from years of work, were trembling, not from fear of rejection, but from the lingering weight of betrayal. Every time he blinked, he saw her face, not the woman standing before him now, but the one who had been his world for 5 years, the one who laughed at his dreams and promised forever. He could still hear the low, sharp whispers she gave him that morning when she thought he didn't hear, the words that sliced through him like shards of broken glass. She had been talking to another man, telling him she was ready to leave. He had walked away quietly then, not because he was weak, but because some betrayals burned too deep to scream over. Now here he was, standing in front of a velvet-lined display, the sparkle of a diamond burning in his palm, and across from him stood Aisha, her eyes wide with confusion and something else, hope, maybe, or disbelief. She hadn't expected him to call her, much less ask her to meet him here. The world outside was still buzzing with life, car horns and laughter, but inside the store, there was only the low hum of the air conditioning and the faint clink of jewelry being rearranged by a clerk who was pretending not to watch them. Malik, Aisha said softly, her voice almost swallowed by the room. Why here? Why now? He swallowed hard. Because I'm tired of running from what's real, he said, his voice low but steady. And I know you've been right here all along. Her breath caught. They had known each other since high school, had crossed paths at odd times. A wedding here, a chance meeting in a grocery store there, always just missing the moment, always stepping back before anything could spark. But now, Malik was standing close enough for her to see the faint scar under his left eye, the one she remembered from a fight he got into protecting his younger brother years ago. She could feel the heaviness in him, but also the determination. Took a deep breath, the kind you take before jumping into deep water. I'm not going to pretend my heart isn't broken, he said, his voice thick, but I also know it's still beating, and it's beating for you. The clerk had stopped rearranging the display. Even strangers could feel the gravity of this moment. Malik's hand opened slowly, revealing the diamond ring inside the small box. The gem caught the light like it had been waiting for this exact second to shine. You deserve to be chosen without hesitation, Malik said, his eyes locked on hers. You deserve a man who shows up without making you guess, who knows what he wants and isn't afraid to say it. I should have been that man a long time ago. Aisha's lips trembled, her fingers curling at her sides. For a long moment, she didn't speak. She looked at the ring, then at him, then at the floor, as if trying to find her balance in the storm that had just swept through her life. Finally, her eyes lifted to meet his again, and there was something different in them, not the hesitation of the past, but a spark of belief. His breath came in sharp bursts as he stood there, still holding the small velvet box in his hand, the diamond inside catching the store's golden lights like it was mocking him. Moments ago, that ring was meant for the woman he thought he would spend his life with. For months he had been planning, saving, envisioning the moment. But now that vision was shattered like glass underfoot. The betrayal had cut so deep that his hands still trembled, not from the sprint he had made through the streets, but from the raw ache inside his chest. He could still see her face in his mind, smiling at another man the way she used to smile. At him, it was more than betrayal, it was a theft of everything he thought was real. And yet here he was, inside the diamond store. his mind spinning between rage and desperation. The saleswoman approached cautiously, her high heels clicking softly on the polished marble floor, sensing the storm in his eyes. "Sir, are you all right?" she asked in a voice that was soft but carried a note of curiosity. He nodded quickly, his jaw tightening. "I need something. Something that will speak louder than any words," he said, his voice a low growl. The woman glanced down at the box he already held, then back up at him. "That ring would already do that," she said with a small smile. But he shook his head. "It's not for her anymore." The words hung in the air like heavy smoke, and the saleswoman didn't ask the next question. I could see enough in his eyes to know the answer. He turned slightly, scanning the room until his gaze caught on another woman standing by the far counter. She wasn't dressed to impress. Her clothes were simple, her hair pulled back, her attention focused on a small silver pendant in her hands. There was something unguarded about her, something untouched by the games and masks of the world he had just escaped from. Her eyes lifted, meeting his, and for a heartbeat, time slowed. He didn't know her name, he didn't know her story, but something about her presence in that moment felt like an anchor, a strange calm in the middle of the storm. Without thinking, he walked toward her, each step measured, the decision hardening inside him with every breath. She blinked, surprised when he stopped just a few feet away. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice raw but steady. "This is going to sound insane." She tilted her head, curiosity flickering in her gaze. "Try me," she said softly, and so he did. In a rush of words, he told her about the woman he had loved, the betrayal he had just witnessed, the ring still warm in his hand from being carried here in the hope of forever. And then, with the madness of grief still swirling in his veins, he opened the box and held it toward her. "I don't even know you," he said, "but something tells me you're not the kind of person who would do what she did. I can't give this ring to her, but maybe I can give it to someone who still believes in something real." Her eyes widened, her fingers tightening on the pendant she'd been holding. Around them, the quiet hum of the store seemed to fade. The sales staff, the security guard near the door, even the couple browsing wedding bands in the corner all seemed to vanish into the background. It was just the two of them, standing in a strange collision of fate neither could have predicted. "Why me?" she finally whispered. He shook his head. "Because right now, I need to believe someone still deserves this." Her lips parted, but she didn't speak. Her gaze moved from his eyes to the ring, then back again. She could see the pain etched into his face, the kind of pain that doesn't just fade with time. She could also see something else resolve, a desperate determination not to let that pain consume him entirely. And maybe, just maybe, she saw a piece of herself in him. Slowly, she reached out and touched the box, her fingers brushing his. It was a small gesture, but it sent a strange warmth through the cold he'd been carrying all day. The afternoon sky hung heavy with clouds, the kind that promised rain but held it back like a cruel tease, and the streets shimmered with the fading warmth of the sun. Michael's breath was uneven as he stepped off the curb, his polished shoes tapping against the pavement in rapid succession. His pace was urgent, his eyes darting from face to face in the crowd, scanning for anyone who might delay him. He could still feel the pulse in his temples, that deep, unsteady rhythm that had started hours earlier. When his world cracked wide open, he had never imagined betrayal would come in such a quiet, unceremonious way. No shouting, no grand revelation, no slammed doors, just a phone screen, glowing faintly in his hand, and the image he would never unsee, her lips pressed to another man's cheek, her eyes laughing, her body leaning into his as though she had forgotten entirely who Michael was. Her name was Amara, the woman he had once sworn would be his forever. For 6 years they had built a life together, a life Michael thought was unshakable. But that image had burned a truth into him he could no longer deny. The cold rush of reality had left him standing in the middle of his apartment, his thoughts scattering like leaves in the wind, and in the middle of the chaos, one thought stood above the rest. He would not be destroyed. If love had betrayed him, he would choose love again, but on his terms this time. That was why he was walking so fast now, his suit jacket flaring behind him, his hand gripping the small velvet box in his pocket that wasn't even purchased yet. He knew exactly where he was going. King's Diamond & Co., the most exclusive jewelry store in the city. Its windows gleamed like they were lit from within, and the gold lettering on the glass doors shone even in the dim light of the late afternoon. Michael pushed the door open, and was greeted by the cool, conditioned air, the faint scent of polished wood, and luxury perfume. Inside, the lighting was designed to flatter every diamond on display, sparkled as though the universe had trapped starlight just for them. "Good evening, sir," the salesman said, his voice smooth, his smile professional. "How can I help you today?" Michael's voice was low but steady. "I need a ring. Tonight, something unforgettable." The salesman's eyes flicked to the tailored cut of Michael's suit, the sharp line of his jaw, the quiet intensity in his expression. "Of course, this way." As they walked toward the glass cases, Michael's mind drifted for a moment to Layla. She was the one he had thought about in that split second after his heart had broken. Not Amara, not the man in the photo, but Layla, the woman he had once known before everything had gotten complicated. She wasn't someone from the glittering parties or the endless dinners with clients. Layla was real, raw, unfiltered, a woman who spoke her mind and never pretended to be anything she wasn't. Years ago, he had felt something for her, but timing and loyalty to Amara had kept him at a distance. Now, that barrier was gone. "Do you have something in a pear cut?" Michael asked, leaning over the case. "Yes, sir," the salesman replied, lifting a tray from beneath the glass and setting it carefully on the velvet counter. The diamonds caught the light, scattering it in 1,000 directions. Michael's eyes locked on one in particular, a pear-shaped diamond set in a slender platinum band, delicate yet strong, elegant but without arrogance. He picked it up, turning it between his fingers. For a moment, he imagined it on Layla's hand, her skin warm against his, her eyes widening in surprise, her lips parting in that way that always made him forget his words. "I'll take it," Michael said without hesitation. The salesman nodded, already moving to package it. "Would you like it wrapped?" "No, I'll give it to her tonight." And as he stood there, the memory of the betrayal was still there, sharp and fresh. But it no longer felt like the center of his story. This wasn't about running from the pain anymore. This was about running towards something better, something true. The rain had begun to fall harder by the time Malcolm stepped off the curb, his polished shoes splashing into shallow puddles that mirrored the neon lights of the street. The city around him was alive with the hum of car engines, the occasional honk, and the murmured chatter of pedestrians rushing under umbrellas. But to him, it was all muffled, like the world was behind a glass wall. His mind was trapped in the weight of what had just happened. The moment betrayal had wrapped itself around his chest like a vice, stealing his breath, his certainty, his future. The apartment still smelled of her perfume when he had walked in, but the laughter coming from behind the bedroom door hadn't been for him. Her voice, soft and pleading, had broken into his heart like a thief as she begged the man with her to stay, to ignore the fact Malcolm might come home any second. It wasn't just betrayal. It was the open, careless kind that doesn't bother to hide. He had stood there, frozen, unable to move for what felt like hours, though it could have been seconds, until the stranger finally walked out with a nod, brushing past Malcolm like he didn't exist. She hadn't even chased him out the door. She just stared, unashamed, her silence heavier than any apology could ever be. That was 2 hours ago. Now he was walking through the storm without a destination, the cold water soaking into his jacket, his fingers tightening around the small velvet box in his pocket. The ring inside had been chosen after weeks of saving, planning, and imagining a life with her. It was supposed to be a symbol of forever, but now it felt like a cruel joke pressed against his palm. He didn't know why he hadn't thrown it into the gutter, why he hadn't hurled it into the night sky just to watch it disappear. Instead, he found his feet pulling him toward the part of the city where the storefronts gleamed brighter, where the windows were filled with watches, necklaces, and diamonds that sparkled like tiny frozen stars. The rain made the sidewalks shine like glass as he stepped beneath the awning of a high-end jewelry store. Inside, the warm glow of golden lights and the faint scent of polished wood felt like another world entirely, one untouched by betrayal. The salespeople moved with quiet precision, their voices hushed as they attended to customers browsing the glass cases. It was here, among the glittering displays, that Malcolm saw her. She was leaning slightly over a case of diamond necklaces, her hair catching the light in waves that shimmered against the backdrop of soft piano music. She wore no umbrella in hand, no hurried expression, only a calm poise, as though the rain outside didn't dare touch her. Their eyes met for a moment, a flicker, no more, but something in her gaze made his breath catch. It wasn't beauty alone, it was an unspoken recognition, the kind of look that makes two strangers feel as if they've crossed paths in another life. She smiled faintly, as if acknowledging that his coat was dripping and his shoes left dark marks on the carpet, but without judgment. He didn't know why he walked toward her, why he opened his mouth before his brain had caught up, but the words came anyway. "Looking for something special?" he asked, his voice low. She tilted her head toward him, her fingers brushing the edge of the glass. "Something that means forever," she said, her tone measured, almost testing. He thought about the ring in his pocket, about the life it was meant to seal, and something inside him twisted. "Forever," he repeated, almost like a challenge. For reasons he couldn't explain, he pulled the velvet box from his pocket and opened it right there under the warm light of the display. The diamond inside caught every reflection in the room, a prism of sharp, cold light that seemed to cut through the fog in his chest. "Would you take this?" The question slipped out before he could think of the implications, before he could even process the madness of proposing to a stranger while his ex's betrayal was still echoing in his mind. The woman's lips parted, her eyes flickering between the ring and his face. The salesman behind the counter froze, his hands still hovering over a tray of bracelets, sensing something unusual unfolding. "You don't know my name," she said finally, her voice soft but not rejecting. "Maybe. I don't need to," Malcolm replied, his voice steadier than he felt. The silence stretched between them, fragile and charged, until she reached out and touched the box with the tips of her fingers. Her smile was small, mysterious, the kind that could mean yes or no, salvation or ruin. And in that moment, Malcolm realized he didn't care which.